Hi, welcome to Neural Splendor. Today I wanted to talk about what to do if you experience low oil pressure while you're driving. First thing is you have to have a baseline. You have to know what your oil level is when it's full hot. So after you get your oil change, you have to do this every time you get your oil change because they don't put exactly the same amount in. Run it, get it hot. When you pull into the truck stop or whatever, open the hood, pull the stick out, clean it off. Put it all the way back in, pull it out, put your thumbnail at the top of the oil. If you can't see through the stick to see the markings, clean it off with a rag. Have your phone ready, take a picture of it with your thumbnail there. That's high. If you experience low oil pressure, the first thing you want to check is to see if that oil level is above the high mark. Typically, if you start getting dilution, when you get about 3/16 to 1/4 of an inch above that full mark, you're going to start losing oil pressure. So that's number one. Number two, know what your base idle oil pressure is. Base idle oil pressure can drop if you have dilution. It is also dependent on engine RPM. So if your buddy says, oh, well, mine's 18 and yours is only 14, maybe his engine's idling at 800 RPM. You can change the idle on those engines so that the mirrors don't shake or the seat doesn't vibrate or the steering wheel. You've got about a 300 RPM difference. That makes a big difference in idle oil pressure. It changes in 50 RPM increments. Most engines are 700 or 750 out of the box. You can bump it up to 8, you can bump it down to 600. So you have to compare apples to apples when you're talking about idle. Another problem you can have is a gauge failure. We've had about 5 to 7 gauges fail in our Pete's and KWs, and we're talking about like out of a 75 tractor fleet. So it's not a big number, but we've had some fail, and when they fail, they don't go to zero, they read low. And the drivers would call in and say, hey Joe, you know, the oil pressure gauge is reading really low. Now you know my name is Joe, and what should I do? So the first thing I ask them is your check engine light on? Nope, let it. Push the clutch in or throw it in neutral and let the engine idle. Is the check engine light on? No. Most likely the oil pressure's okay. I tell them get to a shop where they can hook up a tool and check it and see if it's okay, if the sensor's bad or the gauge is bad. And in those instances it's been the gauge. So you'll want to carry with you an oil filter, a wrench to change it, a couple gallons of clean oil, a bucket to put your dirty oil filter in. It's got a lid that closes and won't let the oil leak if it falls over underneath the bunk. And if you're driving down the road and your oil pressure just changes, drops 5 to 15 pounds, and you've got no dilution, the oil level's correct after you check it, spin that oil filter on. We've had a number of oil filters collapse because the oil got sooty, and those filters will catch the soot. Cummins has actually made some different part number filters for certain engine models that had trouble with sooting filters up and plugging them. I have seen oil pressure on an engine at 10 pounds at 1800 RPM, and when I went in and checked, there was 138 PSI at the oil pump before the filter and 10 pounds after the filter. The filter was almost completely plugged. Another couple pounds and the bypass would have opened. When the bypass opens, you're dumping unfiltered oil back in the engine. But unfiltered oil is better than no oil. So to recap, carry a spare filter. Remember that it can be a sensor issue where that's reading improperly. Remember it can be the gauge. Remember your oil level needs to be on full. If it's over full, it could be fuel dilution or coolant dilution, both of which will cause low oil pressure. And then last, change your filter if everything looks okay. And if that brings it back up, you just had a filter that was soot plugged. We'll talk about that in another video, what to do if you have problems with soot in the oil, because that's a more complex problem. Thanks for joining me. Have a good night.